We are first going to take up H222. You all should have gotten the final, I believe, edited version. We'll double check to make sure that case. But the only change since we saw it last was on page 10 to 11. Instead of having one report on that data that we asked for, this would put it into the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission's ongoing report. The other was actually session law, where it was just asking, do you guys all understand session law? It took me 5 years to finally have somebody tell me, because I was always embarrassed to ask because they kept on saying session law and I had no idea. And I just continued in ignorance, which is so often, oh, I shouldn't say that. So session law doesn't go in the green books. It doesn't go in these. And it's just essentially for the session. It's when you say, just give me this one report or do this one thing. And we don't want it like, in the laws forever. It's just really kind of short term. So that's what session law is. That's what we had because we were just asking for one report. But now this and page 10 and 11 is putting it into the green books where it defines the Fatality Review Commission and its duties. And we're adding this reporting requirement for ongoing. That's all that does. Any questions on that? And I will take an initial motion just to, first of all, for the amendment, which will just have a show of hands. So it's draft number 4.1. I take a motion to find the amendment favorable.
So moved.
For a second.
Okay.
All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hands. Opposed. All right. So to get the discussion going, I will also take a motion to, and this one will be a motion to find draft number 4.1 of H222 as amended, favorable.
So moved.
There's a second.
Second.
Okay, discussion. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'll just say, I guess, I appreciate what this may represent in terms of helping to shift our thinking about prevention of domestic violence. We do so much to address domestic violence after the fact. And by adding, the option to require participation in a domestic violence awareness accountability. Now I'm worried that I have the acronym incorrect, accountability program. We're really, I think, adding an option that is more geared toward prevention of, well, not just prevention, but understanding what the drivers behind domestic violence, understanding, it's just a much more holistic approach. And I really appreciate that. And I'd love to continue exploring ways that we can broaden our approach. So I'm really happy about that addition in 222. And then also understanding, the other part of this bill that where we have, we're stating that plaintiffs seeking an RFA may be awarded use of vehicle, the family vehicle or their vehicle, to escape further abuse. Appreciate the work of the network as always to keep us informed of the needs that they're finding of survivors and victims who need, that so that we can continue to adjust our laws and make room for all the ways that people really need help and protection. So I'm grateful for both of those things and happy to support this bill.
Any other discussion?
And of course, sorry, the one other, we've combined so much and kind of packed a lot into this little 11-page bill. But expanding the definition of course of conduct to include, stalking by geolocation. That was a few weeks ago. So I don't want to lose sight of it though, because that's also, something as we again learn about how these crimes are committed and the capabilities offered via electronic means and digital means and technology. We want to do our best to keep up with that. We generally fall far behind very quickly because everything changes so fast, but so I'm grateful for that, the inclusion here as well.
Anyone else have any comment or discussion on this? I guess I'll just say that the one component, I mean, there's several components and it has been things that have been worked on for several months. But just specifically the part related to the Fatality Review Commission for the Domestic Violence Accountability Program. I do understand that that they asked for more, where this would be, if there was a violation, it would be subject to penalties under 13 VSA 1030 as a crime. And we changed that to more of a carrot approach and somewhat, I guess, less stick than a crime. And I think that's appropriate for at this stage, but we also have reporting requirements in case this, just to see how this is working out and if we're going to have to tighten that at all. But I think this is a really good start for it. Appreciate the work of the Fatality Review Commission. It's big work. Anything else? All right, the clerk could call the roll.
Arsenal,
Yes.
Dolan,
Yes.
Goodnow,
Yes.
Bosley, yes. Harvey,
Yes.
Malloy,
Yes.
Oliver,
Yeah.
Richardson,
Yes.
Christie, Burdick, Belong.
Yes. All right, thank you, everybody. I think it's a good bill. It's a nice bill. And Angela, I assume you be willing to report this as well. So you know what to do. This is the edited version that you just need to get that from Nate and send it forward. And thank you again, Charlie, for your help on this. Wait, who's reporting this one? Angela. So we are going to move back to 410, and we're going to have our internal spy for 432 reporting back to us on scene 342. 342. Yeah. I appreciate you sitting in on it. I'm really interested in knowing how it's going. Yes. So we'll have Robin join us first, since you're here and the other two witnesses aren't. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Sorry, I didn't get the, I was on the road, did not get the email to be here earlier, so I apologize.
No, that's fine. It all worked out fine. We had a chance to go get donuts.
Oh, awesome.
Ken had a chance to go do something nice for somebody. Managed to vote on a bill. It's all good.
Good. All right, so for the record, I'm Dr. Robin Joy. I'm the Director of Research for Crime Research Group, and I am here today on 410. And I am sorry that I actually missed Ben's walkthrough, because, I know that we had worked with you and him on drafting this. And Monica did just call me. She was able to watch it, and you guys had some questions for him that we also have of you. And I think the first one is, what do you wish to accomplish with this? And we asked this, we did meet with the state's attorneys and with Willa to draft a response to Ben on the first draft of the bill. And I asked them that too. The current definition of recidivism in statute, that came about from Justice Reinvestment 1 years ago. And it was just
2008.
Yeah. The first time we had a sentencing commission. And the reason why we had it is that, as you know, we have a lot of 2-year misdemeanors. And so when people were talking about felony recidivism rates and what is, another state doing, well, our felonies don't line up with other states, because most other states, it's a 1 year or above. And we have some 2 years, some states even have 3 years or above. It's all over the mess. So the 1 year definition, right? So you have to be sentenced to incarceration for 1 year or more. That came because your late colleague, Senator Sears, wanted to be able to compare Vermont recidivism rates to Arizona. To my knowledge, he never did so.
Why Arizona? Yeah, why Arizona?
That was the point. That was a state that they used as this was Council of State Governments that came in the first time with Justice Reinvestment 1. He was on the board of Council of State Governments. There was a thing. Okay. I should say, yes. So at any rate, so that's how we have this definition. And the Department of Corrections calculates it every year. And the benefit of the definition that they have is that they can calculate it just with their own data. This definition, if you go to it, they cannot calculate they cannot calculate it just on their own data. They're going to have to build up data capacity to do this.
Who's gonna have to build this up?
Well, because you're ordering the Department of Corrections to do it. Yeah. And so the way they calculate it now, it's all within OMS. They can calculate it within OMS, their management system.
So let me ask.
Yeah.
Between the partners group that have worked on this,
Mhm.
is DOC contacted at all?
No, our recommendation is that you guys talk to them. And it wasn't because we were, you know what, it wasn't.
Say, longer than the next 24 hours, and all of a sudden.
Yes.
Coming to me that, oh, we will get the testimony today and then maybe we'll leave early tomorrow afternoon unless DOC can come in and say,
Yeah.
this is great.
Once
you said their system wouldn't be able to do.
No,
this
there's this, right now, no. So here's how I would do it, and here's how I do it, right?
This would actually have a effective date of 2027.
Well, maybe, yeah. Yeah, so when I do these studies, right, when I come in here and I give you a recidivism rate, I look at the court data that I always get. And then I send a batch list of names and dates of birth over to Director Wallen at VCIC. He sends me back an XML of everyone's rap sheets. I then code that XML into something that I can analyze on my computer. And then I do the work. And so I calculate dates and I calculate all sorts of things. So it's doable. We do it all the time.
Right.
But DOC doesn't do that now. And they don't use the same data sources that we use to do it. And so they would have to build those resources to do that analysis. Yes. But that would involve Monica coming in and saying something about that, just so you know.
I mean, not preferred, right?
Yeah.
It may be more cost effective.
So. All right, keep going.
Yeah. So, but so Monica did tell me some things that you guys talked about when Ben was doing the walkthrough. We don't know who uses this measurement currently. Currently, a lot of us don't use it because it isn't helpful. I wouldn't use it when I was
When you say this measurement, this is.
the one that we currently have, the current law.
You're still.
Right, yeah. But one thing that I do want to make clear, nobody uses it and nobody would use your current one in order to decide somebody's punishment, somebody's treatment. This is not an individual measure. You're not going to get a mark on your record that says, under this bill, you're a recidivist. That's not how it works. We're going to batch do this. We're not going to tell you who anyone is. And this is the same thing if DOC does it, right? This is a research question. It's not a practice question. So I want to be clear on that.
All right, so practice question. Is there something that can be done this is also not going to happen 24 hours. But is there something that could be done to improve our definition of the recidivism rate that actually DOC has a capability of doing at this time? Or is our definition what DOC is able to spit out of their system?
You have to talk to DOC. I think the big problem with the current definition is it does not include anyone who's on probation, right? So that's it, right? That's very popular. It doesn't include anyone who's on probation. Doesn't include anyone who does less than a year. And I think if you go back to our Act 40 report on recidivism, I put in there the numbers of how many people you are excluding by using the current definition. But the other thing that they can't do is that, so you'd have to ask DOC what they can do within their system. The one thing I know that they cannot do within their system are all the people who are sentenced just to fines, because those folks never go to DOC. So if you get a fine only, DOC won't have you in the system because you weren't there for that crime. Sorry.
No, I love this. I think it's a great testimony because it just freed up our afternoon.
Oh my God.
Because I think what we're going to do is we're going to probably in our miscellaneous bill create a task force that includes DOC, the entities that came up with this, and maybe a couple more come back with
Oh,
something that's doable.
okay. Well, somehow this is winning for me.
Yeah.
Somehow this helps me. No, we will of course do as you say. But what would really be helpful is what are you going to do with this information? How do you want to use it? When I evaluate programs, I am looking at calculations like this, but I'm doing what the literature tells me is best practice for that program. And so usually that's 3 years. That's really all I care about is 3 years is what we can hold a program to. After 3 years, it's not the program anymore. It's something else. So that's what we tend to look at. Sometimes we want to know 10, 5, 15 years. You want to see if maybe a policy change had some effect. And it will take us a while to see if a policy change had an effect. Going back to when we had that first sentencing commission, you guys at the same time, this body made a policy change on upping the sex offender mandatory minimum, right? So we wanted to know what effect that's going to have. It's going to take years and years and years to see that effect. So sometimes that's what we do. That's the question. What are you going to,
So I guess when you say, what are you going to do with it? Who's the you we're talking about?
You.
So there's us.
yeah.
You see, there's the state's attorneys, there's you and CRG. I mean, it's like, this isn't just about the legislature, presumably.
Sure.
So-
So yeah, and that's the question that we have for our colleagues too. Right. Currently, DOC does not use the definition; they publish it. Right. Because there's other ways to measure the things that they need to measure.
So all right, let's focus on us right now.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to be asking you and find out how to have you do this for us.
Okay.
Over the next year or two, I want a recidivism study of 18-year-olds
Mhm.
who have gone into juvenile justice system starting in 2020.
Okay.
And how would you do that as far as, what would you look at as far as the definition of recidivism for that population?
So hypothetically, and I didn't read it as closely as I should have this morning, but I thought the draft that we sent over to Ben and we highlighted it, that juveniles wouldn't be covered by this definition.
All right, so
So that would be the answer.
that recidivism study.
So that's an interesting question. Here's how I would conduct that recidivism study. I have an agreement with the judiciary to get information, including the names and dates of birth of juveniles who are adjudicated. So I have that information. That's step one. I have to know who these kids are. So that's where I would start. I would start with the judiciary's data. Who did they sentence? Who did they adjudicate to? And the question was a facility that if you.
No, it's just 18-year-olds.
It's just 18-year-olds. Okay, so just 18-year-olds
who went in there as.
Okay, yeah. So I would start. Here's what I would do. I would start with those names and dates of birth. I would send them over to Jeff. I'd get their criminal histories, and then I would tell you how long from their sentence date. So these calculations that Ben put in here, how long from their sentence date, if they got probation, presumably that's what they would get. It was until they recidivated. And I would follow everyone for the same amount of time because that's really what a rate has to be. I have to follow everyone for the same amount of time.
2021 until current, right?
Right. Yeah. So I'd have to wait 3 years at least from when you change the law for people to go through it. So I would probably be like 5, 6 years out from when you pass the law before I could actually measure.
So it was 20.
This year
Who went in.
in 2020.
So would
Yeah.
you have the data at this point for those went in 2020, 2021?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
We would. I mean, it depends on how many kids there were, really. I'd have to, and I probably told you at some point during the session how many kids those were, but
Right.
I don't remember what I said. Yeah, so that's what we would do. I would probably give you a 3-year recidivism rate, but if you wanted to know what happens to them for 25 years, or if your policy question was about what's their lifetime, and what about, what's this question? What about those 18-year-olds that went into juvenile court after you changed the law? Is their lifetime reoffending less than, right? Because that's really the policy question that you're trying to answer. Is their lifetime reoffending less than the 18-year-olds that went in in 2019.
So, but you did one for 18 and 19 years
Yes,
olds.
yes, yeah.
So, and was that for 18 and 19-year-olds that went into the system in like 2010? Because that was, or do you recall?
I don't recall when those kids, I don't recall off the top of my head on that study. What we did show in that study, though, and there's a chart, we used our definition, which was, I think, 3 years. How many kids were reconvicted within 3 years? And then we gave you the definition, then we gave you the recidivism rate as it is in statute, and the recidivism rate as it was in statute was 0.
Right.
And that's not what you wanted.
Right.
That's not,
Right.
that wasn't helpful to anyone.
It was higher
It was like-
than 0.
Right. Right.
Much higher.
Much higher than 0. Yeah, it was about 68%, I think, right? 62%.
I thought it was 47, but it's
Okay, it could be, could be. Yes.
So I think I understand that part, but let me ask one other question while I'm way off on this tangent. Because who knows what we're doing with this? Yeah,
Just about your question.
yeah, I have a follow-up with the, with.
So, and when you said just now, I would tell you, the recidivism rates for,
Yeah.
like, are you using the current definition of recidivism that's in this statute?
So
Sometimes, so it's, here's what I'm gonna, yes, I will, so the reason why we use conviction is that years ago, we had a conversation with the Defender General, the Judiciary, and a bunch of other folks, and we said a few things. A lot of the literature uses rearrest rates, right, which is another measure. Instead of conviction, you can use rearrest. However, because of the way that we operate in Vermont, not all arrests get reported to the criminal histories. They're not all fingerprint supported. And from the administrative data, I'm going to use those criminal histories because that I get in bulk and I get in a computer form because I'm not going through the paper or looking everything up by hand, right? That's not how we do research. So we can't, right. So we can't really use the arrest rate. And then there was the idea that at least if we're using conviction, there is a sense there that the person is culpable for something, right? So that gets away from the idea that perhaps there may be some arrests that aren't valid, et cetera. But by the time you get to a guilty plea, there's a sense of culpability, and that's really what people are interested in. So that's why we use conviction. I tend to use 3 years because I'm tending to evaluate programs. However, I just was doing some calculations this morning, which were scary. I was looking at how many times, because that conditions of release report is almost done. And I was looking at how many times, how many dockets somebody had through a 5-year period for conditions of release. The highest number was in the 40s, 40 dockets within 5 years for conditions of release, right? So there's lots of things, violations, yeah. So there's lots of things I can measure, and it really depends on what the policy question is that I'm answering. I don't do the same thing all the time.
Right.
The only thing I do is I put in the legislative definition because one time Senator Sears yelled at me because I didn't. So that's it.
we won't yell at you.
I know, thank you for that. Kenny's thinking though.
You can see me.
You know, I'll take it around.
Seems a little all-knowing to me. That is interesting. I mean, would a uniform definition, I mean, be helpful to you? It sounds like it wouldn't. Like you need to tailor, it depends on the question.
It depends on the question that I'm researching, yes. So it is a useful way to talk about things, right? We're all agreeing on the same definition.
Know what the definition is being used in the context of the conversation.
Right, in the context of the conversation. So for the policy issues that you guys may talk about, I can't think of any off the top of my head. It is really for us, when I come in and testify, it really is about whatever program I'm evaluating, or if I want to do a typography of people. Because really, like we have a study going on now about DUI defendants, and those are really interesting folks. And so how long has it been since their last, like I'm more interested in the timing of things and the whole circularity of there's 5 open cases and there's, but they've got 10 disposed cases, and nobody goes through the system in a straight line. And so it's this that is a researcher. And that's the gray area of your policy decisions.
So, I have a question. But so how do we get to the point of having apples to apples comparison on recidivism? When I hear, oh, the recidivism rate is such and so, now I'm starting to understand that, oh, I better look at what the hell they mean by recidivism because it can be drastically different.
Yes.
But how do we get to the point where we have something that we can compare apples to apples? And then I'm gonna go to Barbara and then Tom after.
Well, it depends on who you're trying to. As the State Statistical Analysis Center, I'm always going to put in the report what you put in statute because people look for it. Not just because Senator Sears yelled at me, but because, right, it's there, right? Everyone knows this definition. We all roll our eyes at the definition though, because it isn't terribly helpful. Would we put in things like, I mean, could I absolutely see myself putting in a chart using these definitions? Yes, I could. If the report, at least the 3 and the 5 years, that's usually within the realm of time that we cover in our reports, depending on what it is. But I'm always also going to do what the literature says is best, regardless of what you put in law.
So, well, sure.
Yeah.
Is what the literature says is best, just very dependent on what the question is?
Yeah. Because it's also I know, well, it's also the follow-up questions, right? So, the 2 programs that I've evaluated that I will recommend forever, Diversion, which last time I was here, and then, the program within DOC currently, the risk reduction program had some of the best, recidivism rates I've ever seen, especially for domestic violence, since you were just talking about domestic violence. And, in our report on that, we did any conviction, but then we also used the official definition. And you can look at that report. But what the questions aren't necessarily just what the recidivism rate is, because that's nice. But what it is that this was really good specifically for these offenders, or this was really good for these offenders who attended this many times. And that's the model that's the regression model that we build. It's the rates, that number is just the starting point of the discussion. I think.
Barbara, then Tom.
So
And then
I'm wondering, well, one thing that seems important is I know the integrity of who's doing the reporting. Like I know I've worked with CRG as being the outside independent evaluator. And I'm wondering if part of whatever we craft is important to have an outside, and I don't.
Yeah, other people, sure. Yeah.
Right. But I'm wondering, as I'm hearing you talk, I'm wondering about us repealing the current definition and law and using a best practice evaluation criteria that's used so that it's based on what the question is. And then when you were asking, what do we use it for? And looking at 3 years, I was thinking, well, what if we found out that if people are incarcerated for 10 years, their outcomes are way worse, but 4 years is sort of when people.
Yep. Yeah.
So sometimes we do, that is helpful to have.
Sure. So, whatever you do in law as researchers, that's nice, but you can't actually tell us what to do. Right. I'm trying to be very polite here.
So that's why if it's
Yeah.
if we repeal the definition and say we want evaluation data that is based on
Best practices.
right and standards used, and I don't know if we spell those out, those probably change over time.
Well, they change also depending on what your question is. That's the thing,
But
right?
so us locking ourselves into something may not be. We want to make sure we're getting data that is accurate and will help us answer whatever the question is, but that's going to change.
Yeah.
So is there a way to describe the bigger thing that we want?
I don't know whether statute is the correct way. That's above my pay grade. But I think that there used to be years ago, when you guys were big into RBA, the
Oh, yeah.
right? Remember you used to have, right, it
Yeah.
was right here.
Yeah.
These are the things I had to address in my, there was a thing that was taped, right, to this, to the thing.
How much?
How much, yes, at every witness stand, how much, how well, and how many people did we serve? This was the RBA stuff. And you knew when you came in that I was going to have to answer those questions even, and then sometimes it would just be like, well, I counted 10 people and this is what I did. I think that, I'm not saying go back to the card on the witness stand, but having a set of questions that you want answered when witnesses come before you, I think that is maybe more helpful. Right. So if you want to know the reconviction rates or the rearrangement
We have
rates,
to then get rid of the current definition, right? Because that's going to continue to.
that's in people's minds, the current definition. And it's funny because I would get into my current bosses, came from Department of Corrections, and she would say there's a legislative definition. And I would always say the legislature just ordered Department of Corrections to do it. I don't have to do it. And that's true. It just orders the Department of Corrections. You cannot set that official policy for researchers on what we can do.
No,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Unasked
On us.
DOC.
Yeah. You can unask DOC to do that. I don't know how, it's on their website, as far as when they do it, but yes, it is. It is. And, one of the other things is that one of the things that we do, and again, this is a research question. So we use the criminal histories. The criminal histories tell me who's dead. And DOC does not get that information. So DOC's recidivism rate is actually lower than it would be because you'd have to remove the people who are passed. And this is not a healthy population. Yeah. So the people incarcerated aren't healthy
No,
and they pass.
yeah, say that again.
So when people die, we remove them from our recidivism studies because they're not committing crimes because
I
they're
got
better,
that.
right?
I got that.
Yes, yeah,
You know about it, but
yes,
DOC doesn't know about it?
right. Because we're using different data sources. I'm using the criminal histories, the rap sheets, which tell me whether somebody is deceased. They aren't using the criminal histories. The Department of Health doesn't give DOC every death certificate. They know if somebody dies in their custody.
Well, that's.
Oh,
Right.
okay, thank. I was gonna say, I didn't realize that.
You're not, no, yeah, they know when people die in their custody. Everybody knows. It's front page news. Yes, what we're talking about is when people are.
Comment question.
Are you sure?
Question, I don't know. So I just counted, I think in the criminal justice system as a whole, if we're gonna create a definition, it's gonna have to match what 10 or 12 different agencies are doing when you boil it down, and everybody's gonna have to know the meaning. And we're always gonna change the parameters of what we ask of you, so, and you can do that now. So,
Yeah, and I think that, what's important is, and the judge, in his testimony, they have their own definition of repeat offenders, right? For when somebody's going to be charged as a repeat offender. And that's different than any recidivism definition.
Wow. Okay.
I'm sorry. But it sounds like you get Friday afternoon.
It sounds like a bigger mess than I understood, or maybe it's not a mess and I'm just not.
Or it sounds like something, are we looking for a problem to solve that doesn't want to be solved?
Well, it seems like it would seem like we in the legislature want a way to measure how we're doing. And I hear the standard, I hear about repeat offenders, I hear about recidivism. And I've always thought that, well, I don't know what I've thought. But I thought at least that was a consistent meaning when we said recidivism rates, but now I'm hearing it's not. And so the question is how, because it's really important that we're able to measure our success or lack of success on the policies we're putting forward. And recidivism seems to constantly come up as the measurement you should be looking at. And we need to try to nail down something that we can uniformly use to measure our progress as much as possible.
So let's take the retail theft from last year, right? Last session. So you did a lot on retail theft. Recidivism would absolutely be the proper measure there. But we would also want to know how many, specifically, right? The specific question isn't how many times did that person, get convicted or rearranged, but really how many times did that person get rearranged for a new retail theft or a new property crime, right?
Right.
That would actually really be the policy question, because that was really what you guys were focused on,
Right.
right? And so I think it's also okay when you're doing, and again, I don't know all the rules here, but of saying how you want each policy. That, right? So when you pass a law or looking at a policy change going forward, this is how we would measure it. And we've kind of talked about,
Which we can
right,
try to do now.
right. And so you put, instead of this, you put something else in there.
You have to capture the same known over and over and over period of time.
Yeah, or, and just tailoring it to what we know about certain offenders, for example, domestic violence, which we know a lot about those offenders. And so how one measure may be how long are we going between, arraignments for domestic violence offenses, right? Are we, is it like the heartbeat charts that I showed you from Brattleboro? Are we getting arrested every month for this? Or are we delaying the time? Right. But that's delaying the time is a win, right? It's a start somewhere. So I think that it is a very specific question, and this just gets you to okay, like, is there a number that makes you where it's a win? Like, okay, the policy is a success because the recidivism rate was 10%. Is there a number where you don't ask any more questions? And I don't think there ever is.
I think it's a number to look at trends as much
Yeah.
as anything. If the trends are in the right direction, then good. If the trends are going the other direction, we need to look at what's going on with policies possible.
Yeah, I don't know that that's the trend I would look at, though. Because
I don't either.
I think that the number of calls to police is a good trend.
Right.
Right. I think that the caseloads of the courts is a good trend. For those sorts of, the recidivism rate is measuring so many things that aren't in your control in a lot of ways, right? But also just not necessarily representative of the policy.
Right.
It's really, if we take the pretrial for the VCRs, right? The pilot program that DOC is doing, right, from last year. The measurement there is how many VCRs do they even get charged with? It's not even whether they get convicted eventually. It's how many VCRs or how many FTAs did they get,
Right.
So yeah, I think it's just different for every policy, and it's between you and the researchers and the stakeholders to kind of decide what's the best measurement for this policy.
So of course, yeah, and little embarrassing having been in here for 11 years and heard recidivism, thought that, yeah, there's a definition somewhere. And
No, there was.
and there is. I knew that, but it was like,
Yeah.
so I'm assuming whenever I hear recidivism rate, that's what it is, and it's standard. So having that definition in there is a lie, or maybe not a lie, but it's just kind of mischaracterizes or confuse certainly people like me the last 11 years on what this.
And just to add to even more confusion, that when you have folks come in with outside studies that weren't done in Vermont and studies that are published in the literature, that those definitions are different as well.
Like the Massachusetts, we just had, I think you or somebody testified on the Massachusetts study about, but you would have torn it apart. So Tom and Ian have a question, then we have to get to a couple other witnesses.
Oh, I don't. I was just passing the thing around.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, so I think, am I correct in summary that this doesn't really work because DOC wasn't involved and DOC doesn't have the ability to do what this is asking to do? And on top of that like a standardized singular measure isn't really a good way to measure policy success, and really we should be tailoring any sort of assessment to whatever policy we're asking for.
Yes, I mean, yeah, and that having those conversations about how you want to be measured also gives us time in the field to build those data sets up. And to even see if we're collecting the information that will help.
And so I think, so that's very helpful. Really happy to have this testimony.
Thank you.
I think my only question is,
Yeah.
Is there any example of like any sort of like standard data that is tracked in your field that isn't like tailor-made to a particular question that you use frequently?
Recidivism.
No, I
Just in
not
general?
even, not even recidivism. So I think the point is really well taken that basically we can't be lazy and be like, we want one line to basically determine. We gotta look at the question and be like, okay, the question is this policy effective? Go to you and be like, this is how we want you to like look at this question, and then have that come back to us and then assess it. But I'm wondering, is there any sort of like data set or a question that is tracked?
So there's
you sort of
sets.
absolutely-
There's data sets, but the benefit of us as CRG, as you say, Statistical Analysis Center, is that I have all the raw data.
Yeah.
Like, so I just craft those queries when you contact me and I answer.
Yeah.
And that's huge. Not every state has a me.
Yeah.
I know. We're sorry for those states too.
I'm sure that this will be an ongoing discussion.
Okay, all right.
So, and we'll ask, look at our bills that we've been passing and make sure that we have asked in the right way that we're trying to track. Judge Stoney, what join us? So let me ask really quick before. Kim, do you have do you have a time frame?
Run out before I got to him.
We're gonna be done by 5. Are you good if we're within the 5 o'clock time frame, Kim?
Yes, I'm fine with that. I am going to just run my son somewhere while Judge Zone speaks, and I will listen. So is Todd?
Better be
speaking today
quick.
as well?
Or do you want to go first before Judge Zone? What's your pleasure?
Yeah, just let her focus.
I'm fine.
It would
I'm here till
depend on
5
how
anyway.
many
Yeah.
questions there were.
You can cut us off.
Judge Zone
You can
should
cut us
go.
off as soon as you need to leave. Why don't we go with you first, Kim, and then if you have only 5, you only have 10 minutes. That's as long as we'll keep you.
Well, I really don't want to pull the child card on Judge Zone there, who's sitting there. And truly, if his testimony is short, I feel a little bit behind because I didn't listen. I didn't hear Robin's full testimony. So I
can
kind of
recap
jumped
that.
into
I can
the
recap it
middle.
pretty quick for you.
Yeah, we can recap it for you. And Judge Zone is here till after 5 anyway, because he has a 5 o'clock meeting here in the building. So we're not holding him up. So why don't you go
Okay,
ahead and tell us
let's-
how to clarify everything. Why don't you recap? Ian's going to recap for you.
So this doesn't work at all because DOC can't do it right now with the data set they have, and they weren't involved at all in the drafting of it. And it sounds like, generally speaking, a singular assessment of recidivism rates isn't a really effective way of looking at things, and you got to tailor your data set and what you're looking at to the question and the program that you're trying to assess the value of.
And I guess one of the starting questions, and I think that's good. And I think one of the starting questions for you is, how do you use recidivism rates? And is this definition getting at what you,
How do you define recidivism?
and how do you define recidivism? Another.
Well,
There, go over to you and explain it all in 5 minutes.
maybe means right on top of it.
Just kidding.
Fantastic.
As long as you
Well,
want.
first, for the record, since I jumped in partway, my name is Kim McManus. I am here on behalf of the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. So I think just backing up to the summary, have we heard directly from the Department of Corrections? My first question would be, have we heard from the Department of Corrections that they cannot do this? I guess that would be my first question, is whether.
Go for it.
So, second, Robin Joy is the expert on how to do research, and I am not about to even pretend to know how to go about doing this research properly. For our own purposes, we have the definition of recidivism that currently exists. And so if asked about recidivism, and if we're pulling data from the judiciary, which is what we do, we would be using that current existing definition that is tied to incarceration. We would prefer that the definition, and again, it's not perfect. We completely understand that, and we understand that different definition would work for different scenarios. But if we're trying to capture and all be on the same page with what we are, when we're using the term repeat offender, we need a common definition. And the one that exists, and that's the one we're using. We do not think that captures the current status of repeat offenders, because most people in Vermont do not get incarcerative sentences. So we're missing those who have probation only sentences and then offend again. We're not capturing them in those recidivism rates. So that's our issue. Where that definition goes, where the right place for it to go, we would be open to discussing that. It made sense for it to go here because that's where it currently exists.
It's open. Sorry, I had a little spillage again.
I
Heart
saw-
attack.
So, okay,
Can I ask a question?
please go ahead, cover for me.
What you just said raised the question for me about, your use of the term repeat offender. Your function, your purpose, like not, where, in what ways do you need this? I think I heard you say you need this term defined. And it's not well defined right now, and we don't, and it's not capturing everyone who probably should be captured. So I'm wondering, are you talking about for the purpose of collecting data and sharing that data, or other purposes?
I mean, we are not staffed to regularly analyze our data. We've testified to that a number of times. So when we are asked questions by this body or someone else, another committee, we are trying to pull that information from other sources. So then if you were asking us a recidivism rate about X, we would use the current definition, unless I would hope we would say to you, recidivism as defined here, the numbers are X, Y, and Z. But if we're looking at those who are rearrested after conviction, here are the numbers. So I would hope we would be clear about that. But to be honest, we're also, when we seek these numbers, right, we want to also be able to compare using the same definition. So, I mean, I guess underlying all of this is, if we're clear about what the numbers are representing, and we're all working from that same definition, whatever that definition is, even if it's the better. That didn't sound very articulate to me.
No,
either.
A dangling participle or something, but. Okay, that is what I was wondering though, like for what purpose? And I'm hearing you say that, the hope, the need that you're identifying is for all of us to be, I'm gonna sneeze in a minute. No, talking about the same thing. So that when we as a body, or like as a committee request information, or when you are asked to produce information, you know where to look to get it, and you might need to ask someone else, and you want to be sure that you're asking in the way that so that you'll deliver the information that's being sought and all of that. So I think I understand that the need is for what most shared understandings are for. Just make sure we're all on the same page.
Yes, and I think if I heard, when I jumped into the testimony, I can't remember who said it, but whenever we're evaluating changes that have been made, if we're changing the definition of recidivism all the time, that's going to complicate those evaluations. And so, yes, to your earlier statement, Representative, the more we can clarify that we are all looking at the numbers and then pulling out, and if we're looking at recidivism rates, we're all agreeing on what we mean by recidivism rates. And what our point with this is only that the current definition, when this is the definition that we would look towards, we don't think this definition captures when we talk about those who offend and then reoffend and reoffend with a conviction, because we would not capture those unless they have an incarcerative sentence. So we're missing those in the numbers right now.
Right. So our recidivism rate could look pretty good, particularly, we can modify our definition to make our recidivism repeat offender rate. We can solve our repeat offender problem by defining the problem away. I have found how this public safety issue. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be flippant about this, but I mean, I look at the definition as it is right now, and it gives us an artificial idea of recidivism. Recidivism means, according to the National Institute of Justice, refers to a person's relapse into criminal behavior, which is also kind of a little squishy. I mean, you could go all the way to being arrested, but it's like, so yeah, I agree that this definition doesn't look very helpful. But I'm also hearing we have to look at different definitions depending on the question. But if we're just trying to define the question of what a repeat offender is this what we're trying to do? And maybe we have a different, maybe we just keep the recidivism, the terrible recidivism definition. Well, maybe it's not terrible. I don't want to say that one way or another. But we keep that definition. We have a whole different section called standard measure of repeat violent offenders. And this is what we're going to do to define what we mean by repeat offenders. I mean, is that one approach at least that we're going to just not try to say recidivism that's going to cover everything, but we're specifically trying to define what we mean by repeat offender. And this is presumably what state's attorneys thinks we should do to define repeat offender.
Yeah, yes, I think anything to better capture or just to clarify what we mean when we say that. So just to be clear, though, from our position, the definition of recidivism that's in this bill, while we don't think it captures everything, we do think it's better than the existing definition. So I just want to make sure that we're clear for our position there. And we understand that it does not capture everything. But to Ms. Joy's point, we understand why rearrest may not be where the line should be. Like, we understand that conviction provides that solidity to go back and then make that analysis. And so when we were working on this earlier, we had that conversation, and so it doesn't capture that rearrest person. But to your point, Chair, if you wanted to break down the definition to have, recidivism for incarcerated persons, recidivism for, convictions without incarceration, like, it could be broken down in a number of different ways, and then we could agree on those different levels and the definition of that.
Right, okay. All right, I think I got that. So we may be circling back around to you. This is not going to go out by tomorrow, and we will continue this conversation. And if it somehow becomes much more straightforward, maybe we can even put it in the miscellaneous bill. But there's lots of work to be done. So please take your child wherever that child needs to go. And sorry if we delayed your departure.
I will convey your apologies to my 12-year-old. He will appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for being here, Kim. I really appreciate
Thank
the
you.
flexibility today.
Bye.
So Judge Zone, please join us, and then we are gonna. Judge Zone suggested he'd be very short, so we're getting Isaac Dano online as well, and he can weigh in as well. But Ken, go ahead.
I just think this bill ought to be shredded and we ought to just take up 411.
Yeah, well, I think that we should say recidivism is somebody who's sentenced to more than 5 years of incarceration after release from incarceration, returned to prison within 6 months. And we will then have resolved our problems.
Robin already.
Just Judge Zone.
I'm sorry, Chief Superior Judge, I would suggest though, if you're going to do that, you would make it clear that they were not returned to prison on pretrial detention, but actually on sentence within the 6 months.
Okay, well, thank you.
That'll certainly help your recidivism rate. And based upon the discussion, I'm proud to say that we no longer have a backlog because I'm changing all the disposition guidelines. What a crossover week this is. So seriously though, on this bill, when I was reading it, I've always thought that Section 4 of Title 28 that defines recidivism for the Department of Corrections was, at least from my perspective, not very helpful, because I want to know how long till somebody reoffends. Within the statutes, for DWI, a DWI 2, you have one within 20 years. For domestic assault, for an aggravated domestic second degree, has there been a prior conviction within 10 years? And so there's been different timeframes the legislature has enacted. The determination of what's going to be, however you decide to do it, I mean, obviously there's complications because whatever you decide, yeah, DOC may do it, somebody else may do it, but someone else may not. And then what do we hear? Oftentimes we'll hear about, well, the recidivism rate in this state is X. Well, we do know, correct me if I'm wrong, Robin, is that generally there's this 3-year period is what is generally the standard when we talk about recidivism. But what we don't have is anything that is consistent that we would all be on the same page. And I support the idea. When I read this, I went, I like this because it's going to tell us what we're really looking for. The judiciary does not keep recidivism rates. We're the one that supplies the data to those who calculate those things. So we don't make those determinations.
Have a definition of repeat offender or something like that. That depends on like the.
It depends on the offense. So the legislature enacts what the timelines are there for being a repeat offender. If a judge is sitting on the bench realistically and you're thinking, okay, has this person, are they a recidivist? Do they have a prior conviction? Yes. We don't look at it generally, at least I don't look at it and go, did they have a 1-year period of incarceration within 3 years? Because things like that, you don't really think of. You think, did they get in trouble and get sentenced? And are they doing something wrong that they've been convicted for again? And if so, isn't that what we were really looking for? You commit a crime, you're convicted, and then you commit another crime afterwards. And get convicted
So I have a question about, so I was immediately thinking, oh, well, it'd be fairly easy to change the definition. And instead of the sentence for more than 1 year incarceration, just as, have you been convicted of an additional crime within 3 years? Problem with that is how long is it taking for somebody to go through the process in the court right now? And that, you may have gotten arrested for a new criminal offense 2 years later, but your conviction's not until after the 3-year period.
You cover that on page, for instance, on page 5, when you look at your classes of recidivism.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to simplify by just saying, but okay, all right.
I think that's what you capture there. You commit a new offense that results in a conviction. So you're focused.
Look back at when the offense was committed, not at the date of the conviction. Okay.
That way you can track if that's what you're trying to do. And I noticed, for instance, on page 6, where you look at repeat violent offenders, that I think is an example of the problem you're talking about. You are convicted of not less than 1 year has elapsed from the time you're convicted of a violent offense. And so you might want to, if you go forward on this bill, you might want to have that last repeat violent offenders be the same as the earlier section and tie it into the date of the offense. And that way you don't get caught in, we'll call it the backlog push. One thing that did strike me too, and I don't know if you got into when you're talking about repeated violent offenders. It doesn't define what is a violent crime. It says is considered by who?
Doesn't that have to be done right now under the bail statute as well?
Under,
Against a person?
it's under 7553A, it's act of violence is an element of the crime. And that's generally consistent also, I believe, with federal 18 USC section 16 subsection A, where they talk about the element is an act of violence.
So we can just use that same definition. We just
Yes.
use it.
That's part of the Title 13 VSA 7553A definition for the statute as to when you can hold someone. And the Supreme Court has also interpreted that.
Okay, so that would need to be clarified in here, right?
I think that would be helpful. So everyone's on the same page.
Questions for Judge Zone? Unless you had more.
No, that was really it. I thought when I read this bill, I thought, yeah, I like the idea again, because do we really all believe that recidivism is only that definition in Title IV? And is it really capturing what we want to capture? And I would suggest the answer is no, because it excludes a number of people that we want to know about.
Appreciate that. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll see you in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Tell you.
Tell us. Isaac, over to you. Would love to hear you weigh in on our discussion, especially I understand that you have been listening in on the scintillating conversation that we've been having, and would love to have you weigh in on H410. So over to you. If you identify yourself for the record, proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Isaac Dano. I'm the policy director for the Department of Corrections. Apologies, I was there earlier today, but didn't stick around, so I'm here in Waterbury. But caught a little bit of the testimony, not all of it, so I will do my best. And this is I haven't done a lot of prep on this, so this is a bit of my unvarnished opinions here. But I think generally speaking for the department, as Robin mentioned, recidivism is a little bit of a slippery definition. We have it in statute, someone who's served at least a year, who within 3 years returns to incarceration for at least 90 days. I would say that is overly complex and is also outside of the norm when we look at other states and how they measure recidivism. So I think that's a major piece that I know the commissioner has talked about, at least in House Corrections, is that recidivism, at least for the Department of Corrections, is not a metric that we really look to very closely because it is so out of line with how other states measure recidivism and that there is no national standard. The one that is being proposed here in 410 does move us closer to, I think, what a national closer to the national standard, something that other states are looking to more. But I think as we've also talked about, and Robin and Monica from CRG may remember this in discussions of S14, there's also, I think, some issues around looking at just one single metric. I know the Urban Institute has written about this, whether we should look at kind of a variety of metrics for measuring recidivism. Recidivism is by nature, just looking at one metric, whether someone reoffended. Should we also be looking at desistance, whether people don't commit new crimes? So there's a lot of debate on this. I would say from the department's perspective, if this bill were to go through as is, I did note that the definition here does use language around convictions as opposed to the previous definition, the existing definition, which is about serving incarceration. And just in terms of tracking how the department would compute this, it is easier for us in our data systems, I think, to look at who is actually serving time in a facility rather than tracking the outcomes of cases, if that makes sense.
So, yeah, you can't track if somebody's had a fine only, in other words, right?
Right. I think as it pertains to our data systems, we know who's in our facilities and for how long, but we do draw on court data for trying to understand what someone's charges, convictions may be. So I would just, if we were going to be responsible for putting together and reporting out this metric, it might be easier for us if it adhered to the existing definition, which is data that more closely corresponds to whether someone is actually incarcerated versus their conviction status.
So is DOC the right entity to be reporting out the data? It sounds like the court has the data. So I'm asking Robin that.
So
It's like-
it would be a difference of how you're gonna go about doing the actual job. So I'll give you, so like I said, we use fingerprint supported criminal histories in batch to answer the question because it's easier for us to do it that way.
Yeah.
And it captures things that aren't in DOC's system as it is. So for example, the arraignment rate is what we're going to, I think is in here as what's going to be when you count the beginning of that 3 years, right? Is when, are they arraigned for an offense of which they're going to be convicted? DOC would have to answer, how would they get the arraignment rate for the subsequent offense? Especially if that subsequent offense doesn't come back into DOC, right?
I guess I'm just wondering, I mean, why is it DOC that's the keeper of recidivism data if we wanted to look at convictions instead? Because that would be the court. If I'm probably being thick here.
No, you're not. And I think, so, like I said earlier on the testimony, part of the reason why you have the definition you do is because DOC could do it. Right, and they can do it annually and they, right, it's all, the current definition is all within DOC's OMS system.
So the reporting something that is relatively meaningless to what we want to actually know.
Yeah. Yes. So, but.
Well, they can do it.
Yes. Yes. So the issue is, so the reason why we use the rap sheets and the reason why we built the system to be able to analyze the rap sheets in a researcher way is because if I go to so today I was doing Judiciary's data, their names and dates of birth aren't standardized. So I could be Daniel A with a period in the first and middle name column and Daniel A without a period after the A. And it's they're gonna count them as two different people. When we move out of the judiciary system into the fingerprint supported and name double checked rap sheets, then all of those things get sorted. And that's the more accurate data. The judiciary absolutely feeds the data into the criminal history system.
Right.
It's their data, but it gets a better treatment and it's a better source.
Right.
The raw data out of the judiciary. So the person who should do it are the people, I'm not advocating for us, but because any researcher can get the access to the bulk criminal histories, it's in statute. But that would be the gold standard of what the data source is that you would use to measure the recidivist event.
Right, so you wouldn't necessarily be using DOC data.
No.
So I guess, Isaac, so you're saying as I'm getting it, that, yeah, the definition is better, but DOC can't produce the data to this definition. And I guess then my question is becoming, well, do we untie this requirement that DOC report the data in this new definition? You know, do we just, why are we bothering to get this data from DOC at this point? If it's not useful. And if when we're doing research, we're going to the court and maybe DOC as well, and maybe to Jeff Wallen. And so it's like, I'm trying to figure that out.
Well, Chair, if I may, I think there's a subtle scope shift from the existing definition to the proposed definition. And you see that. So, and, put it more bluntly, in the existing definition, it's those who are sentenced to 1 year or more of incarceration, and then return to prison. So, as Robin said, that's all happening kind of within DOC's jurisdiction behind the prison walls. The new definition that's enumerated here, proposed definition, is around convictions. So I think, that would probably lie with the courts.
Right. So the question is whether we need that other definition at all and need that DOC to continue annually reporting this? Is this something or is that just the report that's available upon somebody asking?
Yeah, I'd have to look at our public information. I do think we do put that out annually. The recidivism rate for Vermont hovers around 40%, but again, apples and oranges when looking at other states. I would say that generally, as it's constructed now, the current metric does not really drive a lot of policymaking for the Department of Corrections because.
Or the legislature. Or anybody else. But have you had a chance to compare our rate to Arizona's? I'm sorry.
You are on a roll.
I apologize, Isaac. It's late in the, just before crossover session. Ian,
Can I just, it's not really a question for you, Isaac, but just to carry your like line of thought on
please.
disconnecting. So let's just say let's disconnect DOC from it altogether. And we're just like, we're gonna redefine recidivism because nobody likes the definition of recidivism right now. We're not going to use the limitations of DOC to define what recidivism, right? So we make this new definition and we have nobody tied to it to like pull the data or anything. We're just saying like, this is how Vermont's defining recidivism.
Right. It's like if you come and tell us
Yeah.
about recidivism, you better be using this
But the
definition.
thing is, but we don't know if they will.
But we will presumably know what they're defining. I mean, at least if it's from CRG, they'll tell us.
It almost makes me wonder if it should just be like every time we ask for data about something, we make sure we're asking them how they're defining the recidivism.
Well, yeah, there's that too.
And so it almost makes me wonder why we would have any definition of recidivism in statute and when it's going to be ignored or changed depending on what we're asking for.
I would assume we want like an ongoing idea of what we're seeing as far as recidivism
We
rates.
need an evaluation.
But then we have no one pulling it.
We need a contract with evaluators.
Right. Or slowly, well, again, it can't be DOC. They don't have the information as far as convictions. If it's
Right.
got to be convictions, which only makes sense to me.
Yeah.
That it's convictions because, a lot of things are, so you wouldn't get a deferred sentence, or would you? You'd still have a deferred sentence, Isaac?
Again, currently, if they are serving time within a correctional facility that meets that statutory,
So that's it. So even probation wouldn't be included, just to.
not in the
Oh.
current definition, not based on conviction.
All right, so this is not even fine only.
Yeah, this is so because that is amazing.
Okay, so this is only for those people who actually are getting incarcerated, which has been going down pretty significantly. So what is that even telling us? I would say.
That are dead.
Yeah, go ahead.
And you need to be reincarcerated for at least 90 days.
Right.
And so
Many folks, and I think I know Representative Dolan can speak to this. Vermonters are very proud of the systems that we've built in the community justice centers to deflect folks from the carceral system, as we should be. So, I think there is some debate about the utility of this metric.
I don't think there's any debate. I would say that it's, all right, so bigger issues here. I think that it makes sense that this definition just goes away, that we have a new definition, but it's like the next big question is, what does that mean? Does that mean if there is research or something that we at least want them to be looking at this, or when somebody comes to us and is talking recidivism, we're expecting that that's what they're talking about? Or should we assign the Attorney General's office to give us a report every year on recidivism rates for certain things? Or it can be ad hoc when we go to CRG and they'll tell us whether this is a good measure or not. But we need more discussion and more testimony, I'm sure, on this issue. Isaac, thank you for being available, though.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me so last minute.
All right, thanks. So Todd, do you want to weigh in on this for 5 minutes?
it's up to you.
Are you willing to take on, to tell the Attorney General that you're going to take on reporting annually on all recidivism rates? And
Before I sit down, I have thoughts and feelings, but otherwise
That's why I sit down.
Todd Delos, Assistant Attorney General, the AG's office. We support the language broadly that's in here. We work together with CRG and other stakeholders to work on the edits within this. I don't have a lot to offer in terms of other than understanding the challenges of state data systems that don't speak to each other well. And it's a policy issue for the committee, but I would say one challenge of competing definitions is that even if you were to ask every time you got the data, you'd never be able to compare column A with column B with column C without 87 footnotes from the data folks. I mean, this is, you know, the CRG knows this well and is working on it. From the AG's perspective, you know, our lane in here is mostly through the diversion side of things. And I think from a policy standpoint, there's value in understanding when folks go to diversion. I think there's greater value in understanding when individuals either in a carceral setting, as we were just talking on the sidelines here, at least as a proxy for severity of the crime. It's not everything, but at least it is a proxy, understanding there are caveats around what a prosecutor chooses to do in a certain jurisdiction or not. But and then, you know, I couldn't speak to DOC's capacity on data, but one would hope there would be the ability to draw more offenders, whether under supervision or within direct offender incarcerative status.
Right, so I mean, I could see wanting, well, I would want to know that those were being diverted. And this definition, neither of these definitions would cover them. There's no conviction that, you know, it could be pre-charged, they go in. We kind of want to know if that person re-offends, and wherever that re-offense ends up, if it goes back into diversion or if it goes all the way through to conviction. So that's data, but that would be one of those situations where we want specific data, which isn't it kind of is re-offending, but outside of either of these definitions of recidivism.
And I would flag, I think you'd have some challenge there because there wouldn't necessarily, certainly for pre-charge, there wouldn't necessarily be any records once somebody completes the programming.
Well, we're trying to make sure there's at least those kind of level of records.
And our goal is certainly to track the data as we take a step towards Act 180, right? The goal is going to be to track all that data to at least see, maybe in a disaggregated sense, or in an aggregate sense, how programs are succeeding. But I think,
I mean, we're going to want, I mean, on the pre-charge, and I can look at that, that was a mess as far as deletion and all that stuff. And we were going to revisit that after the sealing, you know, maybe next year. Okay. Because I think we do want to be able to track individuals going through diversion if that's a better success rate. And you've done that. The CRG has done that. And certainly there was a very good success rate for first timers.
yeah.
I understand. So, all right. Well, I think this will be a continuing discussion.
And luckily for the committee, Willa will be back next week.
All right. No, I appreciate you being here as well. So